You might have never heard of Corinthian FC, but this team from London is one of the reasons that football is so famous all around the world. They influenced Real Madrid to wear the all-white kit, and they're the reason that Sport Club Corinthians Paulista in Brazil, one of the most famous teams, has their name. They were known for championing the ideas of amateurism, something that can still be seen in the way they play in the 8th tier of English football to this day. The Corinthian Spirit can be easily summed up with their attitude towards penalties. As far as they're concerned, a gentleman would never commit a deliberate foul on an opponent, so if a penalty was given against them, the goalkeeper would stand to the side so they would not gain from this ungentlemanly conduct. If they received the penalty, the captain would walk up to the ball and deliberately miss, as they didn't want to gain an advantage from unsportsmanlike conduct. This ethos of sportsmanship, fair play and playing for the love of the game gave Corinthians a big reputation all around the world, which is still seen in some places to this day. While they aren't complete amateurs like Andrew Robertson's ex-club Queen's Park are up in Scotland, they do play for a wage, so this can be emulated pretty easily on FIFA. So in this video, we're going to look into how we can implement the Corinthian Spirit into your FIFA save and some of the teams that you might want to try and do it with. So one of the weirder rules that they followed was if one of their players managed to get a red card, they would instantly never be allowed to play for Corinthians ever again. Of course, this is a very extreme rule to try and implement on FIFA, but it goes towards their idealistic view that they would never be unprofessional or be unsportsmanlike. Simply, if you do receive a red card, release the player as soon as you can. Next up is the famous penalty taking rule. So again, if you do receive a penalty from the AI, just make sure you blast it over, use your captain if you can, because that is the general rule that they did in the past. If you are doing this save on FIFA, make sure you sign players with low aggression, because Corinthians viewed aggression as one of the least desirable parts of the game and a thing to be avoided if you can. As Corinthians was actually founded to try and spread football outside of the United Kingdom, I would try and make sure that my team was all of the same nation and pretend that they were trying to spread their version of football around the world too. Another thing that's mentioned when thinking about Corinthian Spirit is they try and avoid tricks. Of course, this was a different kind of tricks that we have these days, but if you want to try and make this even harder, maybe sign players that only have 1 or 2 star skills wherever possible. Of course, the tricks they were talking about were more dirty tricks, such as fouling players and giving away penalties as mentioned before. But of course, since their heyday of football, diving has become pretty important, so if you have a player with a reputation for diving, maybe consider getting rid of them. For teams you can use for this, Corinthian Casuals unfortunately aren't in the game. The closest team to where they used to play is Leyton Orient, who currently play in League 2, so that could be a very good shout. If you wanted to try and make it a bit different, you could always transfer a Greek team to the English pyramid. The name and the rules are both based on the spirit of the old city-state of Corinth in Greece, so it's not out of the realms of possibility that picking a Greek team and only picking Greek players, for example, could become a good and more interesting way of doing this challenge. If you try and do this challenge on Football Manager or on an older version of FIFA, of course you can pick Corinthians Paulista, or if you want a team with a little bit more of a tangent to Corinthians, you could pick Real Madrid, as they play in the same colour and of course were influenced by them in the 1900s. The final objectives for this challenge are pretty cool in my opinion. Corinthian Casuals were actually the team to give Manchester United their biggest ever defeat, an 11-3 win in 1904. So if you do play in England, try and beat Manchester United by more than 11 goals in one match to give them an even bigger defeat. Or if you're playing outside of England, try and beat 11 goals against a massive team in whatever top flight you play in. Some of the other challenges relate to former players. For example, Corinthians had a player called Andrew Watson, who was the first black player to play association football at an international level, so maybe you could try and get 11 black players in your team that you play in one match. They also had Charles Bambridge, who held the record for the most years as England's top goal scorer. Only Michael Owen, Vivian Woodward, Wayne Rooney and Gary Lineker have more goals for England, so try and beat the England top scorer record, which I think is 52, with a player that you've got out of your youth academy. The final interesting player I want to bring to your attention was Tincey Lindley, who was a centre forward who instead of wearing football boots wore brogues, which are sort of a smart business shoe. If that doesn't sum up what Corinthians were about, playing for the love of the game rather than trying to get the absolute best performance out of their players, then I don't think anything else would. If you do own Football Manager, of course, I think you can get a mod pack that does give you the leagues for the Isthmian League that Corinthian Casuals currently play in. They were merged between Corinthian and Casuals FC in 1939, and despite them being so low down, they do still try and abide by the ideals of Corinthian Spirit. Even if you don't give this a go, I hope you've learned a little bit more about how football used to be in England in the late 1800s. This kind of professionalism not being important but the love of the game being key is something that you'll find all around football no matter what level you play at. I think it's important that this kind of ideal stay in football because a lot of the time you do see children's football especially, they're starting to do diving and faking and trying to con the referee, which I don't think really is the ideal way for children to play football. But then again, you don't really see teams like this being successful, so if you do want to be successful, maybe this isn't the way to play. If you do try and play with the Corinthian Spirit going forwards, then let me know. I'd love to see a video and some examples of how you try and implement it on FIFA and who you pick. There was no team that had more England players at once than Corinthians, where they managed to supply the entire England team for 2 matches in 1894 and 1895, a game against Wales, and this has never been achieved again. This could be the absolute end goal, try and have 11 players of yours in the England squad, but again this might be quite easy if you do manage the England team. Have fun if you do give this a go, and don't get too beaten up if you do have to release your best player who got a red card accidentally. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.